Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an impressive and surprising story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about life and death. Let's meet Dr. Gideon Thorne, a skeptical neurosurgeon who, after years dedicated to science, died and returned with a revelation that promises to shake the foundations of religious beliefs. He discovered, in his own skin, secrets about human existence that go far beyond what religions told us. What he saw on the other side will leave you speechless. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of these transformative stories. Get ready for a journey that will expand your horizons and awaken your curiosity about the mysteries of existence. My name is Dr. Gideon Thorne, and for more than 2 decades, I have dedicated my life to neurosurgery and medical education in Seattle. Throughout my career, I have grounded my convictions in the most rigorous scientific logic, a perspective that has not only guided my medical practice but defined my complete understanding of the world. As a neurosurgeon, I have always held the firm belief that human consciousness was intrinsically limited to the brain, being merely the result of complex chemical reactions and electrical impulses navigating through our neural network. When patients shared their near-death experiences with me, I dismissed them as simple manifestations of a brain in a state of deprivation, desperately fighting to maintain its functionality in its final moments. Each report of tunnels of light, encounters with deceased loved ones, or feelings of profound peace was methodically filed away in my mind as yet another example of hallucinations induced by a suffering brain. My dedication to science required concrete evidence, measurable data, results that could be replicated in controlled laboratory conditions. There was no room in my thinking for mystical experiences or spiritual interpretations of human consciousness. Medicine was my guide, and neurology, my compass in understanding human behavior. However, destiny, in its infinite wisdom and irony, had different plans for me. A personal near-death experience not only challenged every pillar of my scientific knowledge about human consciousness, but completely revolutionized my understanding of life, death, and everything that exists beyond the limits of our physical perception. Today, I feel an urgent and profound need to share my story, not just as a personal account, but as a testimony that can expand our collective understanding of the true nature of consciousness and human existence. It was a seemingly ordinary morning in Seattle. The sun had barely begun to rise above the horizon when it all began. I was in my office, reviewing some medical records of patients who were going to be operated on that week, when I was suddenly struck by excruciating pain that seemed to set every nerve in my body on fire. The intensity was something I had never experienced in my entire life, an agony that started in my head and quickly spread down my back, as if every nerve ending was being burned simultaneously. I tried to stay conscious, to use my medical knowledge to understand what was happening, but my body began to contort in uncontrollable spasms. The pain was so intense that I could barely form coherent thoughts. In a matter of minutes, which felt like an eternity, I felt my consciousness fragmenting, being pulled into a dark abyss that I could not resist. The world around me began to darken, sounds became distant, and a feeling of crushing heaviness took over my entire being. I vaguely remember hearing alarmed voices, hurried footsteps, and the familiar sound of medical equipment being activated. I later learned that I had fallen into a coma due to a rare bacterial infection that affected my neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for consciousness. By the medical logic that I knew so well, I should not have had any kind of insight or experience during this period. As a neurosurgeon, I knew that damaged neocortex meant total absence of consciousness. However, it was precisely at this moment that my true journey began, an experience that would challenge everything I believed I knew about human consciousness. What happened over the next few hours would forever change my understanding of life, death, and the very nature of existence. The first stage of my experience was marked by absolute, suffocating darkness, a state I later came to call the worm gaze. It was a place where there were no memories, words, or any sense of human identity. Imagine being completely conscious, but devoid of any reference that defines you as a person. There was no more Dr. Gideon Thorne, no more the neurosurgeon, the professor, the husband. There was just a primal consciousness floating in an absolute void. In this state, I was drawn along by what appeared to be a network of shadowy roots and veins, snaking through a dense, claustrophobic darkness. The sensation was of being pulled deeper and deeper into an endless abyss, where all notion of humanity seemed to dissolve. It was an indescribable horror, not because of the fear itself, but because of the complete absence of everything that defines us as human beings. Time had no meaning in this place. It could have been seconds or millennia. There was no way to tell the difference. Every moment in this darkness seemed to stretch infinitely, creating a feeling of eternity trapped in emptiness. Consciousness, stripped of all its social and cultural layers, experienced a primordial state of pure existence, without form or direction. It was the lowest point of my existence, a state that defied any attempt at rationalization or scientific understanding. Everything I had studied about neurology and consciousness seemed insignificant in the face of this overwhelming experience. It was in this moment of absolute emptiness and despair that something extraordinary happened. A point of light began to form in the distance, like a small flame piercing the infinite darkness. From the bottom of that abyss of darkness, a point of light emerged that would change everything. Initially, it was just a small flame in the distance, a tiny beacon of hope in the midst of absolute emptiness. As it got closer, I could tell it was no ordinary light. It was pure white, surrounded by delicate gold and silver filaments that danced in perfect harmony. The most extraordinary thing was the music that emanated from this light, a heavenly melody that transcended any sound I had ever heard in my life. It wasn't just a song you heard with your ears. It was a vibration that resonated through my entire being, as if every particle of my consciousness vibrated in tune with this divine harmony. The light exerted an irresistible attraction, not through force, but through a silent call that seemed to awaken something deep in my essence. As the light approached, its intensity increased, but in a way that did not dazzle or cause discomfort. On the contrary, each time its luminosity grew, I felt more welcomed and understood. It was as if, for the first time, I was being guided to a place of absolute belonging. The golden and silver filaments began to intertwine in complex patterns, forming geometric structures that seemed to contain all the knowledge in the universe. Each movement of these filaments told a story, revealed a truth, awakened an old memory that I didn't know I possessed. The music, now more intense, seemed to be the very language of creation, each note carrying deep meanings that transcended our earthly understanding. As I approached the light, I felt myself being gently lifted from that dark abyss, carried on a wave of pure love and understanding into a dimension that felt infinitely more real and true than anything I had ever experienced in my physical existence. I emerged from the darkness into a place of indescribable beauty, a realm I came to call Gate Valley. It was a vast valley, covered in lush vegetation that pulsed with a life that transcended our earthly understanding. In this place, I experienced an extraordinary transformation. My consciousness seemed to float like a particle of light, resting on a butterfly that danced among thousands of others. They all moved in perfect choreography, flying over fields of eternal flowers that emitted colors that do not exist in our known visual spectrum. Every element of this valley, every leaf, every petal, every particle of air, vibrated at a harmonious frequency that suggested an existence beyond death. Life there was not a process of birth and decay as we know it. It was a permanent state of being, an eternal dance of creation and transformation. The air itself seemed to be alive, charged with an energy that nourished and revitalized. The colors were more vibrant and deeper than anything I had ever seen on Earth, some of them completely new to my human perception. Time flowed differently in this place. Each moment seemed to contain eternities, but without causing anxiety or boredom. It was in this scene of transcendent beauty that an angelic presence manifested itself beside me, a radiant young woman, with eyes that seemed to contain all the knowledge of the universe and an expression of absolute serenity. His presence emanated such a profound peace that all doubts and fears I might have simply dissolved. Without uttering a single word, she gave me a clear and profound message. You are loved, you are protected, and you have nothing to fear. This communication did not happen through words, but as a direct transfer of understanding, as if our consciousnesses were momentarily merged into a single universal truth. In that moment of connection with the angelic being, a profound revelation hit me like a wave of instant understanding. It was a truth that seemed to have been kept secret by all the world's religions, a fundamental reality about human existence that transcended any specific doctrine. Reincarnation was not just a philosophical concept or a religious belief, it was a fact of existence, as real as gravity or light. Each human life was just one chapter in a much longer journey of spiritual evolution. No one lived just once. Each soul returned again and again, in a continuous cycle of learning and purification. Religions, with their limited interpretations and promises of eternal heaven and hell, had distorted this fundamental truth, creating artificial barriers between people and their true spiritual nature. Understanding came with overwhelming clarity. Every life experience, every relationship, every challenge was carefully planned as part of a larger process of spiritual growth. I saw how different lives were connected, how unlearned lessons in one existence turned into new challenges in another, how bonds of love and forgiveness transcended the barriers of time and space. I understood that free will and destiny were not opposing forces, but complementary. Each soul chose its path before being born, although it maintained the freedom to make different choices during the journey. This revelation did not diminish the importance of our earthly lives. On the contrary, it gave them an even deeper meaning, showing how each moment was a precious opportunity for growth and transformation. The journey continued, taking me to a space I can only describe as the core, a place where light and love reached an intensity that transcended any human concept of divinity. There, I experienced a revolutionary understanding of the nature of God. He was not the anthropomorphic God of religious scriptures, nor a separate and distant entity that judges and punishes. It was a force of pure, unconditional love, a presence that permeated all existence and connected all beings in an infinite web of consciousness. In this core, I realized that the universe was not a collection of separate particles and forces, but a single, ever-expanding expression of divine love. The energy emanating from this place was so intense that it seemed to dissolve any trace of individuality. Yet, paradoxically, I had never felt so complete and aware of my true identity. Every atom, every molecule, every living being was a manifestation of this universal consciousness. The separation we experienced in our physical lives was an illusion. In fact, we were all different expressions of the same fundamental consciousness. The love I felt in this place was so intense and absolute that it made our human concepts of love seem like mere shadows of its true nature. It was a love that healed, that transformed, that understood everything without judgment. In this state of expanded consciousness, I understood that the fundamental purpose of the universe was not conflict or competition, but harmony and evolution through love. Existence itself was a continuous act of divine love expressing itself through infinite forms and possibilities. This understanding transcended any scientific theory or religious dogma I had ever known. One of the most profound aspects of my experience was the life review. It was not a simple recollection of past events. It was a total immersion in every significant moment of my existence, experienced through not only my perspective, but also through the emotions and sensations of all those who were impacted by my actions. The review started from my first memories, but it did not follow a linear chronological order. Events unfolded in a complex web of causes and effects, showing how each action generated waves of influence that extended far beyond the immediate moment. I felt the pain I caused others, the love I shared, the happiness I inspired, and the suffering I inflicted. Every moment was lived with crystal clarity, without filters or justifications. The most surprising thing was that there was no external judgment. The assessment came from my own expanded consciousness. Guided by a deep understanding of universal love, I realized that the barriers we built between us were completely artificial. Every action we took affected the whole, like waves spreading across an infinite ocean. What we did to others, we literally did to ourselves, for at the most fundamental level, we were all connected into a single, universal consciousness. This review was not a punishment, but an opportunity for understanding and growth. Each moment of repentance was accompanied by a deeper understanding and the possibility of transformation. The awakening was a gradual and, in some ways, bittersweet process. I found myself back in my body, surrounded by doctors and my wife Lauren, who was holding my hand with tears in her eyes. The transition back to the physical world was disorienting. The material reality seemed simultaneously very dense and strangely unreal compared to the dimension I had experienced. The physical pain was intense, but it carried with me an unshakable certainty about the true nature of existence. The sounds of the hospital, the beeping of monitors, the voices of healthcare professionals, the clatter of equipment, seemed harsh and artificial compared to the heavenly harmony he had experienced. The fluorescent light was pale and lifeless compared to the divine radiance of the core. In the days that followed, I tried to share my experience with my colleague, Dr. Miles Wexler, but I realized the difficulty of putting into words an experience that transcended our language and our usual understanding of reality. He listened with the incredulity typical of a scientist, trying to find rational explanations for something that went far beyond rationality. Lauren, on the other hand, demonstrated an openness and understanding that were fundamental to my process of integrating this experience into everyday life. She seemed to intuit, even without words, the depth of the transformation I had undergone. Adapting to the physical world was a considerable challenge. Everything seemed different now, the colors less vibrant, the sounds less harmonious, the time more rigid and linear. However, I carried with me a deep peace and understanding that completely transformed the way I saw and lived life. Today, I understand that I returned with a clear purpose, to share this experience and the truths it revealed. It's not just about telling an extraordinary story, but about awakening people to a deeper understanding of reality. The universe is not a cold, mechanical place as modern science often portrays it. It is an infinite field of love and consciousness where we are all connected on an ongoing journey of spiritual evolution. My medical practice has changed profoundly. I still use scientific knowledge, but now I do so with the understanding that we are treating not just bodies, but developing souls. Each patient I meet is an opportunity to manifest that unconditional love that I experienced at the center. Science and spirituality are no longer antagonists in my mind. They are different aspects of the same search for truth. I remain a neurosurgeon, but I now see the brain not as the source of consciousness, but as an instrument through which universal consciousness expresses itself in our physical reality. This is not the story of an isolated miracle. It is a testimony to the true nature of existence, a wake-up call to a greater reality that awaits us beyond the limits of our ordinary perception. Each of us carries within us a spark of this divine truth, waiting just for the right moment to awaken to our true nature. My mission now is to be a bridge between these two realities, showing that we don't need to choose between reason and spirituality. We can embrace both in a broader understanding of existence. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.